Welcome back to the Old West Tales, where every story whispers secrets of love, heartbreak, and redemption. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Drop your location in the comments. I'm curious which part of the world my viewers are from. Sit back and let me take you on a journey that might just melt your heart tonight. The first time Daniel Mercer saw her, he forgot what he had been about to say. It was late September in 1887, and the little town of Red Creek was settling into one of those cool evenings that made the dust smell like autumn and the mountains look closer than they really were. Daniel had ridden into town to buy supplies for his ranch. Nothing more, nothing less. He had no reason to notice the young woman standing outside the general store, except that her horse had broken loose from its hitch and was trotting nervously down the street. She was trying to catch it, her dark brown skirt gathered in one hand, while the other held a small leather valise against her side. Daniel swung down from his saddle, caught the reins before the animal reached the saloon, and brought it gently to a stop. "Easy now," he murmured. The woman hurried toward him, breathless and embarrassed. "Thank you, mister. I thought I had it tied properly." Daniel handed her the reins, and when she looked up at him, something inside him went still. He stared at her face as if he had seen it in a dream years ago. Her eyes were gray-blue, clear and steady beneath dark lashes. There was a small crease beside her left eye when she frowned. Daniel knew those eyes. He knew that expression. He had spent half his childhood looking into them. His voice came out almost as a whisper. "You have my father's eyes." The woman blinked. "Excuse me?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Your eyes, they look just like my father's." She gave him a puzzled smile. "Then who was your father?" The question struck him harder than a bullet. Daniel had been 12 when his father disappeared. His mother had always said that Elias Mercer was killed somewhere beyond the Wyoming line, but no body had ever been found. Daniel remembered almost nothing about the man except fragments: a deep voice, rough hands, a silver watch, and those unusual gray-blue eyes that seemed to change color in the sunlight. His mother had refused to speak about him after his disappearance. When Daniel was 18, she had finally admitted that Elias had left town after an argument with a wealthy rancher named Silas Whitmore. She claimed Elias had been accused of stealing money and running away rather than facing the law. Daniel had never believed it. His father had been stubborn, sometimes reckless, but he had never been a thief. Still, without proof, there had been nothing Daniel could do. Now, standing in front of this strange woman, he felt a door opening in his memory. His name was Elias Mercer, Daniel said quietly. The woman's expression changed instantly. The color seemed to drain from her face. "Elias Mercer?" she repeated. Daniel nodded. "Did you know him?" She stared at him for several seconds before slowly reaching into her valise. "My mother told me that was my father's name." Daniel felt the world tilt beneath his boots. "What did you say?" She pulled out a folded piece of old paper, worn at the edges from years of being handled. "My name is Clara Whitmore. My mother was Evelyn Whitmore. She died 3 months ago." Daniel stared at her. Whitmore, the same name that followed his father into the grave, or wherever he had gone. "Your mother married Silas Whitmore?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Yes. He raised me after my mother brought me to him as a baby." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then you're his daughter." "According to everyone who knew me," Clara said, "but apparently not according to my mother." They went into the quiet corner of the general store and sat at a wooden table, while the shopkeeper politely pretended not to listen. Clara unfolded the letter. The handwriting was faded but graceful. She explained that her mother had left it behind with instructions that Clara should read it only after her death. The letter began with an apology. Evelyn wrote that Clara deserved to know the truth, even if the truth destroyed everything she believed about her family. She confessed that Silas Whitmore was not Clara's biological father. Clara's real father was Elias Mercer. According to Evelyn, she had loved Elias before Silas ever entered her life. Elias had worked as a ranch hand on the Whitmore property, and the two had planned to leave Wyoming together. But Silas discovered their relationship. He threatened Elias, promising to ruin him and have him arrested for a crime he had not committed. Elias disappeared shortly afterward. Evelyn later discovered she was pregnant. Silas offered to marry her, but only if she claimed the child as his. Terrified and believing Elias was dead, Evelyn agreed. Clara read the letter with trembling hands. Daniel could barely breathe. Why didn't she tell me? Clara whispered. Why didn't she tell anyone? Daniel looked down at the letter. Maybe she was afraid. Clara shook her head. She was afraid for 30 years. That doesn't make it right. Daniel understood the anger in her voice. He felt it too. His entire life had been shaped by a lie. The two strangers spent the next morning searching old records in the county courthouse. Clara wanted proof. Daniel needed it. They found Elias Mercer's name in the property records, employment documents, and an old arrest ledger. There was no conviction. There was, however, a strange entry from 1858 stating that Elias had been detained for questioning regarding missing payroll money from the Whitmore Ranch. The accusation had been withdrawn 2 days later. Daniel stared at the page. My mother never told me this. Clara leaned closer. Look at the signature. Daniel followed the faded ink. The complaint had been filed by Silas Whitmore himself. But beneath it was a note from the sheriff. No evidence. Funds are covered. Daniel clenched his fist. Then why did my father disappear? Clara looked at him. Maybe we should ask Silas. Daniel slowly turned toward her. Silas Whitmore died 7 years ago. Clara nodded. Then we find someone who knew him. That someone was an elderly former ranch hand named Samuel Bell, who lived alone on the outskirts of town. Samuel remembered Elias immediately. Best rider I ever knew, he said, sitting on his porch, and one of the finest men Silas ever hated. Daniel leaned forward. Why did he hate him? Samuel sighed. Because Elias knew something. Clara's eyes narrowed. What? Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Your father discovered Silas was stealing land from small homesteaders. He'd forge debts, change property records, and send men to pressure families into selling cheap. Elias found the ledger proving it. Daniel felt cold despite the warm afternoon. Where's that ledger? Samuel shook his head. Elias took it and disappeared. Clara whispered. He didn't disappear. Samuel's face hardened. No, he was chased. Samuel told them that on the night Elias left, he had been seen riding west with 2 men from Whitmore's ranch behind him. Elias escaped, but his horse was later found dead near the canyon. Everyone assumed he had been killed, but Samuel had never believed it. I saw him 3 weeks later, he confessed. Daniel stood abruptly. You saw my father alive? Samuel nodded. He came to me after midnight, said he was heading south. He asked me to watch over your mother and you. Daniel's voice cracked. Why didn't you tell us? Because Silas came to my house the next day. He said if I spoke, your mother would lose everything and you would end up in an orphanage. Clara covered her mouth. Daniel turned away, trying to control the storm inside him. For 29 years he had believed his father abandoned them. The truth was far crueler. Elias had been trying to protect them. Samuel reached inside his coat and produced a small metal box. Your father left this with me. Daniel opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a silver pocket watch and a folded scrap of paper. Daniel recognized the watch instantly. He had seen it once as a child. He picked it up, and for the first time in his life, he could imagine his father's hand holding it. The paper contained only a few lines. If Daniel ever learns the truth, tell him I never left because I wanted to. Tell him I loved him. Tell Evelyn I am sorry. And if my daughter is ever old enough to know who I was, tell her I loved her before I ever saw her face. Clara began to cry silently. They spent the next several days trying to discover what had happened to Elias after he left Red Creek. A newspaper archive finally gave them a clue. In 1860, a man named Elias Morgan had purchased a small farm in northern Colorado. The age matched. The description mentioned a scar above his right eyebrow. Daniel remembered his father's scar. They traveled south together, neither willing to admit how strange their new relationship felt. They were siblings, yet they were also strangers. Along the way, Clara asked questions about Elias, and Daniel shared every memory he had. He told her how his father used a whistle while repairing fences, how he once built Daniel a wooden horse, how he hated coffee but drank it anyway because his mother made it too strong to refuse. Clara laughed through tears. He sounds stubborn. Daniel smiled. You have no idea. When they reached the farm, they found an old woman named Margaret living there. She had known Elias Morgan for 26 years. The moment Daniel showed her the photograph from Samuel's box, she covered her mouth. Elias, she whispered. I wonder when someone would come looking. Daniel's heart pounded. Where is he? Margaret looked toward the distant fields. He died 8 years ago. Clara closed her eyes. Daniel felt grief for a man he had already mourned once. Margaret invited them inside and brought out a wooden chest. Inside were letters, photographs, and a small Bible. He never stopped talking about his son, she said, and his daughter. Clara stared at her. He knew about me. He knew you existed. He tried to return, but he was afraid Silas would hurt you and your mother. He watched from a distance whenever he could. There was one final letter addressed to Daniel. Margaret handed it to him. He opened it slowly. Elias wrote that he had spent his life regretting every mile that separated him from his children. He explained that after escaping Silas's men, he had believed returning would only put them in danger. He had built a new life, but he never built another family because he could not stop hoping that one day the truth would reach them. A father can lose many things, the letter read, but he never stops being a father. Daniel pressed the paper against his chest. Clara stood beside him, crying openly now. He wanted us, she whispered. All those years he wanted us. Daniel nodded. Yes. They returned to Red Creek before winter. Clara refused to use the Whitmore name after learning what Silas had done, but Daniel told her she didn't have to erase the life she had lived. You don't have to become someone else just because you learned where you came from, he said. She looked at him with those familiar gray-blue eyes. And you, she asked, are you going to spend the rest of your life angry? Daniel thought about his father, his mother, Silas, and all the years stolen by fear. Maybe for a while, he admitted, but I don't think Dad would want that. Clara smiled. No, I don't think he would. The following spring, they bought a small piece of land together outside Red Creek. Daniel called it Mercer Valley. Clara opened a schoolhouse for children who lived too far from town, and Daniel expanded his ranch. They argued like siblings, laughed like old friends, and slowly learned how to fill the empty years they had lost. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Clara stood beside Daniel on the porch. She held Elias's silver watch in her hand. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never met? She asked. Daniel looked at her. Every day. And what do you think? He smiled. I think our father spent 30 years hoping we'd find each other. Clara looked toward the horizon. You have his eyes too, you know. Daniel laughed softly. I thought you were the one with his eyes. Maybe we both are. She slipped the watch into Daniel's palm. Then we should make sure they remind people of something good. Daniel closed his fingers around the watch and looked at the woman who had arrived in Red Creek as a stranger and become his sister, his family, and the final missing piece of story he had carried his entire life. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the old frontier wind moved through the grass, carrying with it the same quiet sound Elias had once heard when he dreamed of coming home. And for the first time, Daniel understood that sometimes the truth did not arrive to destroy the past. Sometimes it arrived to give the lost a way home. I love all of you, my wonderful audience of Wild West Tales. Tell me how this story made you feel. Leave a comment below. Type 1 if you love this story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic tales from the wild.